This idea for this hearing, this workshop this morning, came several months ago when a few of you visited the office for a more of an informal chat, and I wanted to hear a lot more. That's why we're here today. I think we've heard it in many cases, and certainly in the district that Representative Scavello represents in Monroe and Northampton County, in the district that I represent along the Schuylkill River in Schuylkill and Berks County. There's a continuing need for good quality jobs, jobs in energy, jobs in manufacturing, but at the same time we also want to do whatever we can, not only to protect the environment, but to improve on some of the conservation mistakes of the past. Several years ago, when I was still in the House, I had the opportunity to stand at one of the tributaries of the Schuylkill River and celebrate the return of fish to this small stream. That stream had run black and orange for decades and decades, and there was an old gentleman there, not long since passed, who had known my grandfather. And I asked him, and my grandfather's gone since 1966, I asked him, I said, what would Pop have said if when I was young I would have predicted that someday there would again be fish in this creek, or crick as they would call it outside of Tamaqua? And he said, your grandpa would have thought you'd had way too much to drink. And so we have seen those kind of success stories all across Pennsylvania. I think it's a combination of the private sector and the public sector working together in partnership. I've had to tell many constituents over the years that government will never have enough money, and you don't want it to have enough power to clean up every single last environmental mistake. That in doing it in partnership makes much more sense. It's also much less expensive when it comes to the tax bill. And so I'm going to turn it over to see if my friend Senator Scavello wants to say anything, and then we'll turn to the first panel. Understand that this is a very busy morning. I counted no less than 8 other committees of the Senate meeting at the same time, and so you may see some members and staff coming in and out. But one thing I will pledge to you, every single member of our caucus, every single executive director will get a complete record of what we discussed today. Mario.
Go right to the
All right.
panel.
The first panel, Chad Forsey representing the Pennsylvania Conservative Energy Forum, and Jarrett Gibbons, the Appalachian Region Independent Power Producers, or as they are known, ARIPA. Chad, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you, Senator Argall. Thank you, Senator Scavello, and to the Majority Policy Committee. We appreciate the opportunity to come here today and present testimony on this important subject. So my name is Chad Forsey. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Conservative Energy Forum. We're a 501c3 nonprofit educational foundation that was launched in the spring of 2018, so we've not been around all that long. We were launched because there was a number of folks, a number of former elected officials in Pennsylvania, Republican officials, industry folks, and others who saw a need to address the fact that the other side of the aisle was speaking to this issue of energy and all of the above, and energy diversity and clean renewable energy, and we were not. And so many of us saw a void there that needed to be filled. And as individuals who have advocated for conservative policies in Pennsylvania for decades, we felt like we should step to the forefront, launch the organization, and start to tackle some of these issues along the lines of conservative principles. PennCEF supports free enterprise and free markets. We support getting government off the backs of private landowners and farmers, and new innovative approaches to clean and renewable energy development on the ground. And that's a message that we spread throughout Pennsylvania. And that message brings conservatives to the table to take ownership of technologies that have historically been ceded to the other side of the aisle. We know as lifelong Republicans that jobs, economic development, and national security depend on our having a voice on these issues, and so we're staking our claim. Jobs in Pennsylvania's clean and renewable energy portfolio now stand at more than 90,000. We're growing at a rate of more than 6% a year in Pennsylvania. New technologies include sources like wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, hydro, and electric vehicles that reduce our reliance on imported energy while growing the size and scope of our renewable sector. We don't exclude natural gas, nuclear, and clean coal technologies from this conversation. Our newly developed and legacy fuels provide us with bridges to the future and opportunities to effectively and efficiently reuse waste from our industrial past. So since our founding in 2018, with the help of our Leadership Council, including folks like Lieutenant Governor Jim Colley, former U.S. Navy Secretary John Lehman, and former DEP Secretary Jim Seif, we have supported a number of important legislative proposals, some of which have passed successfully. So I'll start with commercial PACE, which passed the General Assembly in 2018 with the leadership of former State Senator and now Congressman Guy Reschenthaler. And this bill created new low-interest loans for clean renewable projects at the county level. The Community Solar Act, very excited to be the first panelist to talk about this important piece of legislation today. The Community Solar Act of 2019, here in the Senate, it is Senate Bill 705, sponsored by Senator Mario Scavello with us here today. Dozens of new Republican co-sponsors have signed on, and a lot of these are folks who we have met with. And I should take a moment here and also introduce Dr. John Story with us here today, our Harrisburg director. And John and I have met with a number of legislators on this bill. We are actively telling the story of a bill that will cut red tape and create jobs in Pennsylvania, open up significant new markets for solar with the legislature. We've worked on 2 Senate resolutions honoring Clean Energy Week, which just took place the last week of September, sponsored both of them by Senator Pat Brown. And to our knowledge, we've never had a resolution like that before. Newly proposed offshore wind project. Be remiss if I didn't mention this. This has been proposed in Lake Erie. It's a really significant proposal. It could revolutionize energy production in Pennsylvania and create thousands of jobs, and we are supporting it. I want to talk briefly about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative because it's clearly on everybody's minds. It's being discussed, I understand, at another hearing taking place concurrent to this one. So the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, is a market-based program with the goal of reducing power generation emissions between the northeastern states. And the governor recently announced his intent to join RGGI. In the future months, PennCEF will facilitate critical dialogue between House and Senate leadership, agricultural groups, and the business community to create room in the RGGI discussion for business and agricultural input. We believe, as the Senate Republican leaders have stated, that RGGI should support energy diversity in Pennsylvania. It should keep prices low for ratepayers. It should uphold all of the above on energy, and it should include input from the legislature as well as the governor. Our outreach efforts will call for a portion of RGGI revenue to be dedicated to actual energy projects. Imagine that, particularly those that are greatly needed on our farms. The Penn State Ag Council, of which we are a member, is working diligently on renewable energy on farms. And the Penn State College of Ag Sciences, represented here today in our next panel, speaks to the important work of renewable energy development on farms throughout Pennsylvania. The program, and Ed Johnston-Baugh is with us here today, the program that he represents is Exhibit A for future RGGI efforts. I encourage you to pay close attention during that presentation. PennCEF will also continue its ongoing efforts to support farmers who choose to exercise their right to farm, enshrined in our Pennsylvania law, and invest in clean renewable energy on their land, but many are prevented from doing so by local government ordinances, in some cases utility red tape. Pennsylvania should allow farmers to fully invest in their land with new energy development, as our farmers' time is short. The dairy crisis and trade barriers are pushing many out of production. Clean renewable energy on farms creates jobs, keeps land in the family, and eliminates utility bills. And by the way, community solar is going to provide significant new markets for our farmers to invest in. Conservatives can and should take pride in a full slate of energy technologies that have made Pennsylvania a global leader in energy. We must include renewables in this discussion. Millennials, suburban voters, and other groups crucial to the future of the Republican Party want to hear more about these issues. Let's take ownership of these new technologies and bring the job creators from these industries into our fold. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Argel. As Senator mentioned, I represent ARIPA. ARIPA is a trade association representing the coal refuse, reclamation, and energy industry. So a lot of people, I'll give the very brief of it, because a lot of people don't know what coal refuse is, let alone what the coal refuse to energy sector does. Coal refuse, some of you might know it as GOB, CALM, BONY. It goes by a lot of different names depending on what part of the state you are in. But what it is the remnants of old mining. Pennsylvania has a coal mining legacy, and that legacy has left us with piles of old refuse from coal mining sites that sits around across the state, mostly up in the northeast part, heavily up in Senator Argel's district throughout the anthracite region, as well as throughout sections of western Pennsylvania, the bituminous region. As of earlier this year, there were 770 identified sites covering 8,300 acres here in Pennsylvania. These sites, what they do is, as the water comes, the rainwater comes and lands on these sites, they create acid mine drainage, acid mine runoff. That orange and black water that Senator Argel was talking about at the beginning, much of that is running off from these coal refuse sites. They are an environmental problem that needs a solution. Unfortunately, there are not many solutions besides the coal refuse to energy industry. There is just not sufficient funding, for one thing, to clean up all of these sites. There is federal money through the Abandoned Mine Land Fund that does assist with some of this, but the amount of money that we receive from the federal government through that program cannot touch even a start of these piles, in addition to all the other legacies of coal mining, high walls, other types of runoff, and various dangers that sit out there. So the coal refuse energy industry, which came around in the late 80s, early 90s, has been partnering with the state and federal government over the last 30 plus years to really get out and try to make sure that we can clean up these sites. During that time, here in Pennsylvania alone, the industry's cleaned up 225 million tons that have been consumed in our facilities, and then the ash that comes off of that is a beneficial use ash that's sent back to remediate the sites. In doing that, we've restored over 7,200 acres of land. And as I mentioned, with that runoff, the runoff that's created has improved. Cleaning up that runoff has improved over 1,200 miles of polluted streams, those streams like Senator Argel talked about. And you can find those throughout the northeast and western parts of the state, streams that once ran dead, that once ran orange, that are now some of the best streams for wildlife, for trout and other native fish. This is what the industry provides for Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, the industry is struggling. When these facilities were created back in the 80s and 90s, they came in with power purchase agreements. This was under Pennsylvania as a regulated market energy state. All of those agreements, except for one, has expired, and the last one will expire next May. Now these facilities are operating in the competitive energy market, and they were not meant to do so. They were not made to do so. The costs that they incur are largely the cost of remediation, something that no other energy producer is dealing with. The majority of our cost is environmental cleanup. Now, we are out there trying to make sure that we are making Pennsylvania a cleaner place with cleaner water, cleaner air, cleaner ground that can be used as opposed to being dead space. But again, we've struggled in recent years because of low energy prices. Now, the state has done things to try to help us. In 2004, waste coal refuse, whatever you want to call it, was included in the AEPS, Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards, Pennsylvania's Renewable Portfolio Standards Program, as a Tier 2 source. Unfortunately, Tier 2 sources don't receive very much out of this program. The average has been between 10 and 15 cents over the years per megawatt. For most of our facilities, who are able to participate in this, they're lucky to be getting $5,000 to $10,000 per year. It's nothing significant. Whereas Tier 1 sources are getting $10 to $12 traditionally per credit, and that's not counting the solar, which has its own tier. We're just not seeing the benefit coming out of that program. And a large part of that is the fact that the Tier 2 sources more than half of the available capacity in Tier 2 is out-of-state sources. So we are competing with in an oversubscribed marketplace that is depressing this price to the point where we cannot really see any benefit out of it. So thankfully in recent years, the legislature and Governor Wolf have enacted a coal refuse energy and reclamation tax credit. It was originally passed in 2016 at a $10 million level, and earlier this year, thanks to the efforts of Senator Argyle and Senator Hutcherson, who is here, who moved the bill out of his Finance Committee earlier this year, we were able to have that included in this year's budget and increase the amount up to $20 million. This is certainly very helpful for us, but unfortunately, just the way that the markets have gone, it still is not to the level that is making these facilities able to even cover their costs. Many of them are now only operating on a seasonal basis, and what that means is not just less energy, but also less remediation. If you look over the years, historically, the industry would clean up 11 to 12 million tons per year. In recent years, it's been closer to 8, and my guess is it'll fall below 8 million in the current year. We've also seen multiple facilities shut down. Just last year, the facility in McAdoo, PA, Northeastern Power Company, was closed. Earlier this year, the Cambria facility shut down temporarily and maybe going to a permanent closure in the very near future. Likewise, up in northeastern Pennsylvania, the Wheelabrator facility in Frackville has announced that they will stop generating power and close that facility as of March 1st of next year without additional help. So we are looking for ways to make this work. Just recently, we went and had a bill introduced at the federal level with the support of the state. Included in the state bill this year was an incentive to try to encourage the federal government to step in and clean this up, because we believe that this is a responsibility not just of Pennsylvania, but of our nation. The coal and mining industry back in the 1900s really is what powered us through an industrial revolution and multiple world wars. It's what made a big part of what made our nation the strength that it is today. And there's a responsibility there now that we all benefited from this as a nation, and the nation has a responsibility to help us clean this up. And this industry is probably the best way to do that. I'll touch real briefly. I know there was that a lot of people are going to be talking today about RGGI. Certainly, it's something that concerns our industry. If it were to apply to the coal refuse industry, these facilities, which are already struggling financially, would not stay open. But that said, I think there is an excellent argument to be made that these facilities, like other types of waste disposal facilities in other states, for example, the biomass industry, have been exempted. Coal refuse doesn't exist in any of the other RGGI states. So we're going into an uncharted territory here. But if you look at us and what we do in our operating model, we are much closer to, say, a biomass facility, a trash energy facility, than we are to a coal power plant. And if you're looking at this, we should be treated as such. Now, there is an environmental benefit to what we do, again, in the form of cleaner water, in the form of cleaner air by eliminating pile fires that can catch spontaneously and release uncontrolled emissions. Trying to make sure that we are making a better environment is a big part of what we do. And so I think those environmental benefits need to be included and looked at both in the power market and in the environmental regulations that are enacted at the state and federal level. We certainly want to continue to be a partner with the state and federal government to create environmental remediation, but we're going to continue to need the help of the state and federal government as our partner to do that. And we certainly want to thank, again, Senator Argyle and all of the legislators and the governor who have been supportive thus far, and we appreciate your continued help as we go forward.
Thank you, Derek. We're going to save most of my questions for the final segment, but one I just want to do now before I forget. Chad, you had indicated all of the above, which makes so much sense because, markets will come and go, and, if really preparing for the future, we ought not to put all of our eggs in one basket. PennCEF had predicted that if we did not increase the effort, that we were closer to the Declaration of Independence in time than we were to the end of our legacy problems with dangerous deep mines, the abandoned strip mines, the orange rivers, on and on and on. And I guess I'm curious as to, have we made any progress in that prediction, or are we still hundreds of years out? To Jared, to Chad, I mean, will our grandchildren's grandchildren still have to live with this guesses?
Yeah, I will say that we have made progress, but we need to make a lot more when it comes to cleaning up the legacy of coal in Pennsylvania. The way that we extracted coal, the way that we transported coal, in the beginning of the industrial era in this state, left dramatic scars on the land, some of which you've mentioned this morning. But there's no question that we've cleaned up a lot of surface water in Pennsylvania. A lot of streams, a lot of rivers have been cleaned up. We have the acid mine drainage abatement program at DEP has been one of the more successful programs at the department in recent years. I was there under Dave Hess, dealing with that program myself. I feel like, and again, I'm curious what Jared has to say about this, but I feel like we've made a lot of progress, but I would want to echo Jared's comments that we still have a tremendous amount of coal waste, tremendous amount of slag. We even have coal deposits in our rivers that have contributed to Chesapeake Bay problem, and some of these deposits are believed to be immense, but you can't see them. They're deep down under the water. They line the dams, all these dams we have in Lancaster County and places like that. So yeah, I mean, we need to do more. I would encourage the senators to take a look at opportunities to deal with the legacy of our past and to power our future by looking at RGGI. RGGI is whatever Pennsylvania wants it to be, and I think that needs to be said. Because the two thoughts on RGGI. One, the other northeastern states that are already members of RGGI are really, really desperate for Pennsylvania to join. So we've got a lot of wiggle room. We've got a lot of negotiating power. Second thing is on that, the legislature is going to have to seize the bull by the horns and not cede the whole process to the governor and whatever court it may or may not end up in. Because the best chance that the legislature has, and I appreciate, Senator, your passion on this issue, the best way to address that, I think, is to make sure that it is dealt with in the way that RGGI is structured and in the way that revenue is dispersed in Pennsylvania when RGGI takes effect.
So it's not one size fits all.
No,
we
it's not.
don't have to follow the same model
Absolutely
as New York
not.
or Maine or New Jersey.
Absolutely not. We're a very unique state in the energy world in Pennsylvania. It's going to have to be unique to Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Jared?
Senator, we certainly have made a lot of progress. I gave you some numbers earlier. As I said, our industry alone has cleaned up over 225 million tons. But these are numbers that DEP maintains an inventory. There's still over 220 million tons that are identified, and that's only the identified tons. DEP will tell you that inventory is not 100% accurate. We continue to find new sites every day, and a comprehensive update of that inventory has not been done in many years. So it really could be something that needs to be looked at just to know even what the scope of the problem is and get a complete picture of it. But what we do know is out there, they said, is basically the equivalent of what this industry has cleaned up over the last, again, close to 30 years. Now that said, we can continue to clean this up, but only if our facilities are here. And as Senator Argo, you well know, seeing what's going on in your district at the NEPCO facility, when these plants are gone, they're gone, and they will never be rebuilt. New coal refuse reclamation disposal facilities are not going to come around. So if we lose the fleet that we have, there is no real other opportunity to eliminate this. The alternative is you take it, you put it into a landfill. You put it into another type of disposal site and try to control the runoff. But to completely eliminate it, to completely eliminate the environmental problem, this is the one true and holistic way to do so. And from a cost perspective, I mean, the cost of what this industry does in a year would cost the state upwards of potentially $250 to $300 million. The cost to clean up everything in the state, we're talking probably at least a $7 billion, as high as a $15 billion problem to clean up the coal refuse sites across the state. So again, the money is not going to be there to do it. I mean, that's number one. And two, the facilities will not be there if we allow these things to disappear. And as I said, we've already seen multiple of them close down, and we're at risk of seeing several more over the next year without some additional help. So I think there is a possibility that we could see in the next 50 years, if these facilities can keep working and doing the work they're doing, along with the environmental groups who are out doing other types of remediation in DEP, working through the AML funds that we get from the federal government. But in the end, if these things go away, instead of maybe 50 years, you could see 100 years, you could see 150. Some of these may sit there forever, unless we have the resource to do it. And clearly, the best way to do this is through public-private partnership, which is what we see ourselves. We are the private partner to the state, to the federal government to clean this up. And to do it, it is certainly the most cost-effective and efficient, and we'll probably get it done the fastest.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move ahead to the next panel. Leslie Ann Elder from the Coalition for Community Solar Access, Henry McKay from the Pennsylvania program Solar United Neighbors, and Edward Johnson-Baugh from Energy Savings and Renewables. Leslie, would you like to begin, please?
Absolutely. Thank you. So my name is Leslie Elder. I am the Mid-Atlantic Director for Coalition for Community Solar Access. I'm also a proud resident of Pennsylvania. So I'd like to start by just giving you a little bit of background on the Coalition for Community Solar Access. We're a national coalition of businesses and nonprofits who work together to expand solar, specifically through community solar. Our mission is to empower American households and businesses to seek homegrown energy through community solar. We work with customers, local stakeholders, allies, and policymakers like yourself to develop and implement best practices to ensure community solar programs are a win-win-win for all. And our solution really starts with the customer. Our members are solar industry leaders, and they're engaged at every step of the process to ensure that these best practices are implemented, and they're not just theoretical.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to just go through what community solar is as a 101. So community solar refers to a solar facility that is shared by multiple community members who subscribe to that community solar facility, and then they get a credit on their bill, essentially. Now this really provides an opportunity for multiple people to engage in the community solar process because 50% or about 50% of people in the United States cannot access solar, and this is for a wide variety of reasons. So whether they're residents or businesses, and that's because they either rent or they lease, or they can't afford to put a solar array on their home or their business, or they have a roof that can't actually hold one of them. So community solar actually gives them the opportunity to participate in that. So community solar provides anyone who pays an electric bill the opportunity to participate in a solar program. It expands access to solar for all, provides energy choice for customers, diversifies our energy generation sources with homegrown energy, and then ultimately builds a strong distributed and more resilient grid. So there are 40 states that have at least one community solar facility online, and 19 states and Washington, D.C. That have passed legislation to enable community solar. As already referenced, so I won't go through it again, and thank you, Senator Scavello, for introducing enabling legislation for community solar. So I just want to go through some of the economics. One of our partner organizations, Vote Solar, modeled some economic benefits. So what we would see in Pennsylvania is $706.4 million in local economic benefits if we pass this legislation, if only 500 megawatts were built. This doesn't actually include the local taxes that would be collected from these programs. Oops, apologies. Now, you talked about jobs in your opening remarks, Senator Argall. we would see a 26% increase in solar jobs within the first 5 years, and 1,050 of those jobs would be full-time sustaining positions at $33 per hour. Here's the thing that I think is really wonderful about this. Most of these solar arrays would be built in rural communities. We've seen a decline in population, according to Penn State, and then also a decline in job opportunities in our rural areas in Pennsylvania. A lot of these jobs would be in rural areas. There's also a lot of opportunity for farms to supplement their income with these solar arrays. It really provides an opportunity for farms to supplement their income and have year-round income through solar leases, giving them an opportunity to maintain a lot of their income in changing markets, especially within the dairy farms. And I know a couple of other people have more to say about that, like the man next to me. So I'd like to close out with some polling. So a recent poll conducted by the University of Texas and ClearPath found that 83% of Pennsylvanians support taking action on accelerated and development clean energy. On a closer analysis, 85% of Pennsylvania conservatives believe that investing in clean energy technology is a matter of national security and can make us less dependent on the Middle East for fuel. Additionally, 86% of Pennsylvanians believe that American innovation will create economic job growth and opportunities at home. Here's the thing, innovation and independence is part of who we are. And passing SB 705 or HB 531 will actually get us there. Solar energy is part of our energy mix and will actually make sure that Pennsylvania will remain an energy leader well into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for maintaining the time limits that were suggested. This may be shocking to you, but not everyone in this building does that. And so this has been very, very good. Henry, please.
Chairman Argel, members of the committee, thank you for convening this important discussion of renewable energy in Pennsylvania. My name is Henry McKay, and I'm the Pennsylvania Program Director for Solar United Neighbors, a national nonprofit network of people building a cleaner, fairer energy system with rooftop solar as its cornerstone. I'm speaking on behalf of more than 7,000 solar supporters across Pennsylvania about the critical need to allow community solar in our state by passing Senate Bill 705. Thank you. I give public presentations across Western Pennsylvania to assist people to go solar at their home or business. Last week at a meeting in Clarion County, a woman asked me why we can't just build a large solar array somewhere in the area and have everybody share the cheap energy it generates. This is a question I hear time and again, whether it's a homeowner with a shady roof in Westmoreland County or a farmer with acres of unused land in Indiana County. And each time I must tell them that what they're describing is currently prohibited in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvanians of all stripes, as Leslie emphasized, rural or urban, liberal or conservative, want affordable access to solar. For example, just last month we turned out over 200 people in Greene County, deep in coal country, some of them already solar homeowners, at the first annual Greene County Solar Festival. They want to control where their energy comes from and save thousands of dollars while they're at it. They want the freedom to use solar technology to its fullest extent. Already, 22,000 Pennsylvanians have installed solar at their home or business, but many more are unable to because of the myriad reasons that Leslie described: shady roof, an old roof, lack of home ownership, lots of reasons you can't do solar on site at your home or business. For these people, community solar is their only option. Community solar also benefits the landowners hosting the array. In Minnesota, which boasts one of the largest community solar programs in the country, a dairy farm called Eichton's Hidden Acres leases its marginal land to a 5-megawatt community solar array, which brings them over $800 per acre per year in lease payments on land which would have generated about half as much were it given over to grazing. This revenue stream allows the farm to stay in business so that it may be passed on to the next generation. It allows them to keep selling cheese while also selling these solar electrons. Just think what community solar could do for Pennsylvania farmers, especially dairy farmers who are struggling to stay afloat. And of course, more solar installations results in more jobs and more solar businesses throughout the state. I want to divert from my prepared remarks here just for a moment. I want to emphasize that Even if we do enable community solar in Pennsylvania and we don't update our alternative energy portfolio standard, we may not actually see many, if any, community solar projects materialize, because without an updated alternative energy portfolio standard, our SREC market is going to be weak to non-existent. We're not going to be sending predictable market signals to solar developers, and they just won't see these community solar projects as good investments. So these are closely tied, the fates of these two bills. SB 600 is the one that would update our portfolio standard. Let's be clear. It is not any limitation of solar technology or energy economics that is preventing community solar from taking off in Pennsylvania. A residential or small business rooftop solar installation, with the cost spread out over the 25 to 30-year lifetime of the system, currently delivers cheaper electricity than we buy from our utilities. And this is even more true for a community-scale installation. What is holding us back is simply regulatory red tape. Pennsylvania's energy regulations require one solar installation to be connected to one and only one customer's electricity meter. So I'm asking you to cut through this red tape and make our energy system more competitive and more free. Let Pennsylvania homeowners, small businesses, and farmers use solar technology to its fullest extent, giving them, not monopoly utilities, more choice and control over where their energy comes from. Pennsylvania has always been an energy leader from the early days of the Industrial Revolution to today. We earn this mantle by being forward-looking and eagerly embracing new technologies and fuel sources. But the future of energy is with renewable, affordable, fuel-free sources like solar energy. If we fail to take this opportunity to lead, we'll miss out on the jobs, on the economic development, on the cheap energy, and on the historic chance to build an energy system that shares its benefits more broadly and will be left behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Edward.
Well, first off, thanks for the opportunity to meet with everyone here today. The opportunity that we're talking about is largely a result of the advance in technology, and we all can look in our own personal lives and see how technology has rapidly advanced just in the last few decades, which has made renewable energy technology that we're here talking about today such a household word, something that we can all look into the future and think about participating in, as well as the importance of taking a look into the future of what the grid is going to look like. Today in Pennsylvania, we're living with an electrical grid that's gotten us through the 19th and the 20th century. And now it's, as a result of technology, time to look to the grid of the future. And the technologies that we're talking about, photovoltaic, using solar, and some of the things I'm going to discuss here are about pushing us using new technologies into the future and advancing the grid. I'm here representing Penn State Extension. That didn't make it onto the agenda or my name tag. But as an employee of the university, I can tell you that, of Penn State University, I can tell you that the university is fully committed to advancing renewable energy technologies. We can take a look at the recently begun solar park or solar farm in Franklin County that's going to occupy 250 acres to produce 700 megawatts of capacity and supply 25% of the university's statewide electric needs, as an example of the commitment that the university is making toward this technology of the future. Something that doesn't make the headlines, however, also underway recently next to the campus at University Park, is a new biodigester that is being built to process the manure from several thousand animals that the university maintains for a variety of purposes. That biodigester is going to produce heat and electricity not dissimilar to what's being produced at the solar farm in Franklin County. So there are many fronts on which renewable energy is advancing because of this rise and this advancement of technology. So our biodigester leads me to talk about bioenergy as a all-encompassing topic, and it's an interesting that we heard from Jared at Aripa that they're having difficulties burning waste coal or reducing the waste coal amount in Pennsylvania when a bio option may be a good solution or a good means to advance that effort, and in that particular I'm referring to biocoal. We can grow crops or forest residues and produce a biocoal product that burns with the heat content of conventional coal, but it's renewable. And it has 0 to very little sulfur emissions, and it's also qualifies for renewable energy credits, Tier 1 renewable energy credits. So we need to have a conversation about that. But bioenergy, for the benefit of that, we look at moving agriculture or agricultural producers into a new cost strata where they would have the opportunity to grow crops on marginal land that would be used for bioenergy. Typically, those crops encompass switchgrass, miscanthus, and hybrid willow, which the university has done a great deal of work with. But these opportunities present the potential to have thermal heat from bioenergy. There's thermal conversion and chemical conversion of these technologies to other fuels, as well as gasification to produce methane gas. So there's a range of technologies that need to remain on the radar screen here as we look to this advancement of to the future grid of where these technologies will find their suitable place in the market. Our friends have talked at length here about community energy. I want to commit my support to that. I have worked with Senator Scavello's office actually over time, helping to write the border closing bill over a number of years that was in the works. And the community solar option is another step forward to, as I'm saying here, take advantage of these new technologies. But things that work in the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards Act that we need to maintain is net metering. Net metering has been a linchpin in moving things forward since the passage of the law in 2004. As it's priced at the full retail rate, it's important that that be maintained because that's the fair share that customer generators using solar or other means of generation share in the full retail price of the transaction between them and their electric utility. Another component of the bill coming forward from 2004 was virtual metering. In virtual metering law that was passed, we're limited to 2 miles, a 2-mile radius from the system installation. For work with, and I don't know if our community solar folks recognize this or not, but that may be a stumbling block to doing community solar because these projects can easily be further than 2 miles away from the system installation site. And if they're held to that 2-mile rule, many participants will not be able to take advantage of community solar. So my recommendation is that limitation be removed and that the virtual meter be limited, virtual metering should be limited to the territory of the serving electric utility. it makes no difference to them because it's all served through the same billing system. And another part of the AEPS Act that's worked well, but it's worked sometimes well and sometimes not so well because of the border closing issue, but that's the Renewable Energy Credit Program, or as we call them in Pennsylvania, alternative energy credits. I encourage anything that is follow-on legislation to strongly support the alternative energy credit program and make it stronger, because it is the means of balancing the playing field between renewable energy technologies and the fossil fuel technologies. We get into a lot of debate about subsidization, and I would point to the discussion that was held by Jarrett with ARIPA there, that not only has fossil fuel been subsidized, but we continue to subsidize the use of fossil fuels as we try to clean up the mess that's been left on our landscape. So as we move forward, let's not play folly with the fact that startup organizations or startup technologies may need some subsidization. All we're looking at is something that levels the playing field. And then I want to wrap up by just mentioning the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and how that may play in the future here. With the concern, in thinking about this, I was working for the New York Power Authority when the RGGI was formed, and that was prior to the drilling of the initial shale gas well in southwestern Pennsylvania. Much has changed in the 15 to 16 years since that first gas well was drilled near Houston, Pennsylvania, and so the generation mix in Pennsylvania is significantly different as a result, with coal having lost its dominant position, replaced by natural gas. So our greenhouse gas emission profile has significantly changed over that period, not to mention the growth in renewables that we've seen over that period. So as we think about RGGI as a pathway to the future, to bringing this future grid into reality, I want to make sure that we put in place the ability to control the expenditure of those funds and do as Chad suggested, make sure that the money goes toward projects, toward advancing the future grid that I'm promoting here today. I'll close by saying thanks again for the opportunity to speak with you, and I'm looking forward to the conversation that follows.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
Thank you very much for your testimony. First, to get rid of the 2-mile radius, you're saying put within the service area of that utility, correct?
Yeah, having done a little bit of homework, this component, virtual metering, it's my understanding in negotiations back in the 2004 timeframe, was specifically put in place to the advantage of the farm community, because you could have farms that had multiple metering points, and the agreed upon or the negotiated settlement was that they could span 2 miles. And so we set that in concrete, and that's where we're at today. Now technology has kicked in, and such things as community energy have been demonstrated in other states. The limitations, if you go down a country road, it doesn't take long to clock 2 miles on your odometer. And for what benefit, or what are we preserving here, if the only problem that the utility faces is how they bill it? So it's a paper transaction that's conducted within the billing system, and the 2-mile limit, as I said, was merely a negotiated quid pro quo at the time.
Okay. Some folks that don't support solar bring up an issue, and I think you want to throw it out there. They're saying, what happens to the solar panels when they've lost their life expectancy? Where do they go? And I don't know, have we given it some thought, or, because this is a concern of theirs?
Yeah, I can jump in with this one. So that's a question people ask us a lot, and it's a really good question. It's we can recycle solar panels. It's technologically possible to recycle them. We don't have great recycling programs in the United States yet. There are better programs in Europe where the solar market is more mature and they have more panels that are actually coming offline and needing to be retired. So yeah, we're not at the stage yet where it is a huge problem because solar panels have such a long lifetime, but it is something that is going to require industry, particularly manufacturers, working together with government to ensure that there is a end-of-life plan for those solar panels.
Because I see if someone has had the panels up on a roof for a while, for example, and now the technology, they're smaller and they're much more efficient. At some point, these folks might want to do that, and it might not, as the panels continue to improve, you might see a lot of that. But we're faced with that. I think we have to address it somehow, because that could mean support or not support from some members.
And that's a great point, and as Henry described, the basic components of a solar module include glass, aluminum, plastic, and silicon. And then the electrical interconnection pieces. All of them can be recycled. The industry hasn't made that a part of their design criteria thus far, but as we move forward and the technology, once again, the technology advances, these modules are being redesigned as we speak, and they can easily design the ability to dismantle these units far easier than they have been so far. So I think it's something we're going to see in the future.
Okay.
If I could also say, so Brent Aldifer is one of my members, and he is the industry and has been working with us. So if I could defer
Sure,
some
go
time to him,
ahead,
that'd be great.
please.
Senator Scavello, I appreciate the moment. We testified before Senator Tomlinson, Consumer Affairs Committee, and that issue came up, and we submitted a memo on that in addition to the points that were made, there's a couple of things about the waste from solar panels compared to, say, electronic waste generally.
Right.
Very, very small part compared to screens and phones because they last for 25 years. So first of all, you get 25 years. Second, at the end of the 25-year life, they have diminished in output about 15%. And so many of them are reused. Lower economies, third world countries, etc. So, like my kids tell me it's reuse first and recycle second. So a lot of it's reuse. And then the point made on, this is basically glass and silicon sand. So more than 98% is recyclable. And I'd like to submit that memo to you if we could.
Yeah, please do.
It's very comforting to know that in the scheme of things, not only is it small, plus you have reuse, plus it's actually easily handled in recycling compared to other waste streams.
Thank you very much.
I think it comes down to transferable technology. I remember my first trip to Europe as a Boy Scout leader. I was amazed at how everyone was recycling. A few years later, here in Pennsylvania, it caught on as well. I think my next trip to Europe was as an Eisenhower Fellow, looking at the rebuilding of what they euphemistically called the new federal states. We, of course, called it East Germany after the wall came down, and everyone was walking around with one of these. And I said, what is, they called them in German, Handys. And what is that? And today, of course, we've seen that as well. But I want to thank each of the panelists. The Penn State connection for me, Edward, is that I spent 13 long, painful years at grad school here at Penn State Harrisburg, and in my classes, and you had mentioned it, Leslie, that the importance is on implementation. Some of my professors got a little heavy into the theory and the philosophy, and I always would try to very carefully, because I valued my grade, explain to them that the theory is great, but if you can't implement it, we're wasting our time. And so I think each of us have stressed that. I'm curious, in terms of community solar, has considerable opposition developed to the bill at this point, or is it moving ahead without a lot of?
The largest opposition that I hear is from the utilities.
Okay, they
And,
prefer the
you know,
status quo.
As I described, this is a billing transaction modification. You know, they need to be able to distribute or apply kilowatt hours from one account to multiple or many accounts monthly. And it will require a modification of their billing system. They don't want to do that. They don't want to do anything that complicates the month in, month out billing transaction routine. They're opposed to.
Well, we've seen it and we've heard it many times. Change comes slowly to Pennsylvania, but it does come.
Yep.
And
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 I
I
might
would
add
also,
that
I would also say that the utilities are not united in where they're at, but are talking to us about what they would like to see. So
That's a
opposition,
helpful stage.
opposition may be strong in saying that they are opposed to that. I think that we are working very due diligently on trying to figure out what the right pathway forward is. Other than that, I would say that we are very pleased to say that there is not a significant amount of opposition at this time.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize in a lot of other states where there are robust community solar programs, sometimes it's led by utilities. And they, when they're looking at community solar versus maybe rooftop solar, they'll probably prefer community solar because it gives them more of a role to play. For example, Florida Power and Light in Florida is launching what it's calling its own community solar program. It's maybe not what we would call community solar because it is kind of dominated by the utility in that sense, but they're seeing the value, they're seeing customers wanting this, and they're also openly acknowledging that even for the customers who don't subscribe to this community solar program they're developing, they'll also see lower electricity costs because the benefits of the solar are shared across the utility system.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn to the next panel, and then we'll open this all up for discussion. Josiah Neely from the R Street Institute, and Brent Alderfer, the Chief Executive Officer at Community Energy. Josiah, you begin, please.
I'm over here.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm Josiah Neely. I'm a senior fellow with the R Street Institute. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan. Oh, I should probably turn on my microphone. Thank you. R Street Institute is a nonpartisan research organization. We have a free market bent, think tank as it were. We have a headquarters in DC, but we also have state and regional offices throughout the country. I'm actually based out of Texas and work on energy there. The Institute as a whole, we deal with all sorts of different issues from taxes, insurance, etc. When it comes to energy and environmental issues, our focus is on areas where environmental goals or benefits can be reached through free market means, so less government, less regulation, more markets and competition, lower taxes, etc. I think that a lot of the conversation around energy has gotten polarized in a bad way, where people view certain energy sources as being liberal or certain energy sources as being conservative. And that's, I think, is a mistake for several reasons. First, it's not, anytime you have political groups or government trying to pick, which are the right energy sources for the future, I think there's a tremendous potential for mistakes and costs to be imposed on all of society. I think if you look in the past, one of the reasons why the United States has as much coal electricity now as it does is that back in the 70s there was a decision that natural gas was going to be prohibited for use in new electricity because it was needed for other issues because of the energy crisis and whatnot. On the other hand, if you look at some of the great benefits that we've seen, we've had two big energy revolutions over the last decade or so. One was in natural gas, the great price decline in natural gas, and then the other has been in renewable energy, where we've seen amazing declines in renewable energy, such that the most recent Lazard does a yearly levelized cost of electricity report, and their most recent 2018 report, they showed that the unsubsidized cost for wind and unsubsidized cost for solar, for onshore wind, I should say, and solar was in the range of coal electricity. So the prices have come down that even without federal subsidies or other subsidies, they are competitive. Similarly, we've also seen in the last decade a big increase in the demand for specifically renewable energy from the corporate sector. This is for a variety of reasons, hedge against price volatility, the price declines, of course, and then also a growing green consciousness. So our focus has been not on trying to say what are the good forms of energy, what are the bad forms of energy, but rather trying to get the market processes right, the market rules right, looking for regulatory barriers, some of which have already been identified that might be slowing the growth of renewable energy sources, as opposed to a heavy-handed subsidies and mandates approach for any particular energy source. I do want to say, for a way of completeness, and some of the other discussions mentioned RGGI, we do at our street believe that pollution and other things, pricing is a good way to deal with that, and so RGGI is a means of reducing emissions. I think that makes sense. However, it's worth noting that even without Pennsylvania being in RGGI, the amount of coal electricity being used in the state has come down dramatically. I think in 2009, about 48% of the state's electricity came from coal. Now I believe it's 21%, so that's over a half decrease without RGGI. That's actually comparable to some of the states that are in RGGI in terms of the decline. The difference is that those other states are getting the revenue from RGGI, whereas Pennsylvania did not. And the revenue estimates that I've seen have been somewhere in the range of $350 to $450 million a year based on recent emissions. So that's money that can be used for a variety of purposes. Our preference is that money from RGGI or other mechanisms be returned to the taxpayers in some form, but that's a matter that I'm sure that there will be plenty of discussion about going forward. So you were very kind earlier when you mentioned that people were sticking to their time, so I'm not going to go on, but hopefully we'll have more discussion going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Brent.
Senator Argall, thanks for having us today. And for us, we're a developer of solar projects. We're Pennsylvania-based. We work nationally for the last 10 years, and we've been part of leading conservative entry into solar in states like Virginia and Georgia with conservative utilities like Dominion and Georgia Power. And so we particularly welcome the framing of this as, one, a workshop, and two, are there conservative market approaches for Pennsylvania? Like you said, we may be a little slow in Pennsylvania, but I'd say mostly do it right when we do it, and I'd like to underscore that maybe now's the time on solar. So two things to frame what's already been said, and then get to a couple comments on solutions, and I'm anxious to hear workshop thoughts. One, you're on solid footing on the economics, as you've heard. We've developed projects for 10 years, and it's really, in the last 10 years, costs have come down 70%. And so it's in the last 3 to 4 years that you can finally say, Pennsylvania's not too late in this regard, that if we build out solar at scale in Pennsylvania, we'll actually reduce energy costs across the board. And that wasn't so, as I said, even 3 or 4 years ago. So PJM has a dispatch model for all the generation units in the region by price. And we can run and have what happens if we get to 5% solar by 2025 or 10% solar by 2030. And what it does, because solar produces energy on hot summer days when the cost of energy is high, when you get to scale on solar with farmland solar and community solar and some rooftop solar, you actually shave that peak price and you reduce the price across the board for all customers. And the recent study showed that with an investment in 5% solar to 10% solar, you get hundreds of millions of dollars a year in reduced wholesale energy prices. So that's one piece that wasn't before the legislature even 3 years ago. And I think you should know, and to your credit in holding this, that you now have confidence that if we do this right, we can actually reduce energy costs by increasing solar in Pennsylvania. Then one other point that I think maybe gets some misunderstanding in the discussion is solar takes farmland. Heard it said that way. This is one where actually it's the complete opposite of that, because we're losing farmland in Pennsylvania, hundreds of thousands of acres a year. If we get to 5% solar in Pennsylvania by 2025, which is one nice jobs creation mark, that would take about 30,000 acres of farmland. It's about 0.5% of the total farmland. And rather than take the farmland, what we've shown with our farm in Lancaster County and other places is, one, we pay the farmer for 25 years at 4 to 5 times the income that they're getting per acre for crops. So farms that are going out of business can look to solar on part of their farm to preserve the economics, and that's what happened in Lancaster County. That farm that was going probably for development, parking lot on Lancaster Pike, is now in that family for 25 years with good revenue to that farm. Second, unlike other forms of development, we put these modules in by pounding posts in the ground, like fence posts on the back of a pickup truck. We don't disturb the topsoil like most development does. And we plant a grass. We worked with Penn State, so it's a deep-rooted grass. So you're actually improving, like lying fallow, like we let farmland lie fallow. In fact, the Department of Agriculture pays hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in Pennsylvania to ask farmers to let it lie fallow. Here we have private capital paying the farmer to essentially let that land lie fallow for 25 years, and it will improve the organic content of that soil. Finally, we post a bond that guarantees return of the farmland to that family by pulling out the posts, taking the modules away. So there's very few forms of farmland preservation that are funded with all private dollars that improve our energy system and guarantee to improve farmland back. In fact, in Lancaster County, when we first went in there, they said, this is sacred farmland in Lancaster County. You know, they're pretty proud of it down there. And by the end, we got a unanimous vote saying, well, here's a farm that would be gone unless we did this. So I wanted you to have confidence on those 2 points, that we now have economics working for us, and we can actually preserve farmland with solar. So finally, you've heard the different tools: net metering, virtual net metering, Reggie dollars, APS expansion. So what's the problem? If we've got these economics, as Josiah mentioned and others, why can't we just start building? In fact, to some degree we are. Penn State signed a long-term contract that will build solar in Pennsylvania. City of Philadelphia signed a long-term solar contract with us that will build solar in Pennsylvania. But there is the missing piece in any of your policy considerations, and it's this. Energy markets, not only in Pennsylvania, in the region, in the country, are set by fuel prices. So it's pretty good right now. Gas is low, energy costs are low, looks pretty rosy. There's some volatility on the horizon. Those energy prices could move around. But the real point is, we cannot get financing solar more than about a 3, maximum 5-year commitment on energy prices for our project. And we have a 25-year capital investment with no fuel. So fuel volatility and pricing not only doesn't mean anything to us, it keeps us from getting the long-term capital we need. So for want of a better analogy, it's you build a home, a 30-year mortgage. Without that 30-year mortgage, if somebody said, well, I'll give you a 5-year mortgage on a 3-year mortgage, there'd be no home building. That's where we are on solar. So we got all capital, we've got to get it financed, and we've got a short-term energy, volatile energy market to do it. As a result, we have things like RECs, renewable energy credits, that are also volatile, that go up and down, and it's one way to build solar. The piece I would leave you with is a recent community solar bill that one of the utilities put out. As Leslie said, they're not all opposed to it. They're just trying to get these tools right, as you are here. One of them has in there that the distribution utility will do competitive procurement, which, frankly, as a developer, we don't always like because we got to bid down. But in this discussion, that's smart. It's going to get low-cost solar. and they have long-term contracts. So that utility will buy solar not on a 3- and 5-year basis like a rec hedge, but with a 25-year commitment on energy. That's what brings down the price of solar. And in our capital cost, we've shown that you can actually reduce that rec price by more than double. So instead of a 2.5 cent per kilowatt hour rec price, you come down under a penny. The bottom line is, if we can get the tools right, whether it's RGGI dollars or long-term contracts from utilities or others, we can take basically the money that's in the APS bill now, it's on my bill and your bill now, we can take that money and go from 0.5% solar to 5% solar by 2025, and that's 60,000, 70,000 jobs. It's $10 billion of private investment. One final thing quickly, you may know in your area, Clean and Green, which is a good Pennsylvania policy on preserving farmland, but you're starting to hear in places around the state that it's reducing local income taxes. Like, yeah, that's great, we got lots of Clean and Green, but you know what, our tax revenue's down $30 million in a couple of counties. Well, once again, take that farmland, put some of it into solar, which preserve the farmland as I described, you actually take that tax rate 4 and 5 times up as well. So you're using private investment to generate local taxes, state taxes. I guess we're a little enthusiastic about this, but it's really hard to see why this isn't a win-win-win on the economics. And as someone said, really what's missing is, let's just get the policy pieces right on a conservative basis and go forward.
Thank you. Thank you all. This is, I think, very intriguing to me, and as always, the devil will be in the details. This last weekend, my 30-year-old son, a brand-new patent lawyer, was home and decided we should do a piece of the Appalachian Trail that I hadn't done since the early 1980s, and I was a little jealous because he moved so much more quickly along those boulders than I did. But at one point, if for no other reason than because I needed a breather, he asked me a question about the energy crisis of the 1970s, and I gave him a really long answer so I could catch up. And, you know, he was just amazed at the fact that, I mean, gas went up that fast and people were that scared. And I remember looking out at my high school parking lot, and there were no cars there because every mom and every dad was saying, you take the bus, okay? And so, you know, that's ancient history to a 30-year-old today. But times will change, and we will need to adapt. I appreciate the emphasis on farmland preservation. I am the husband of a turkey farmer, and she reminds me frequently that farmland preservation is great, but what you really need is farmer preservation, because you can't really have one without the other. And so whether it's a struggling dairy farmer, and I've heard from so many of those in the district that I represent, or when I get home tomorrow, I'm going to be meeting with my favorite turkey farmer. And so that's really intriguing to me. And I've also seen it used on abandoned mine lands very close to Panther Creek, to one of ARIPA's members. And so it just need to get it right. I feel like we should offer half a graduate credit today for some of the ideas that I've talked to our friends at Penn State about that one. I'm sure if we pay the tuition, they'll be happy to provide it. But I'm curious in that, and I mean, Jared, your opening comments, and you know, I'm not going to be introducing any bills anytime soon to quadruple the state income or sales tax to pay the kind of dollars that are needed to deal with some of the legacy costs. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't attract too many co-sponsors on that bill, and so this public-private partnership is critical. Am I to understand that DEP is not mandated to update the inventory of abandoned strip mines or waste coal piles or streams inadequately addressed by the EMD issue?
They do maintain the registry, and they do their best to keep it updated, but to go out and do a comprehensive look as to identifying what sites have their focus primarily is on keeping track of what they've done, through using state dollars.
Okay.
But again, if you look on that registry, on that list, there's a lot of stuff that's been done that have been done by private environmental groups, stream restoration groups.
They don't keep track of that.
And some of that doesn't always get reported, certain things. And just in general, to go out and really look and see,
Sure.
what is out there. Again, my understanding is that a comprehensive review of this has not been done in quite some time. I believe potentially beyond a decade. This is something that I think would be helpful both from certainly from our perspective and from an environmental perspective, just to be able to grapple on what is the exact problem that's out there.
Sure.
I believe actually it is, like I said, a requirement from the federal perspective under the SMCRA law, the Surface Mining Reclamation, to keep, and they said they do keep it to the best of the ability, but there's a cost factor with going out and trying to keep track of all of this, and so I think that's part of the problem is just the money's not necessarily there to update this on a regular basis and go out and do the work they need to do. So I think that would be something that would be helpful for everybody to understand what is the scope of the problem. And I said we have a good picture, but it's probably not the most up-to-date picture.
All right, good to know. In some of Dr. Argle's classes, we talk about the importance of benchmarking, and so I encountered it when we were first as a House member dealing with the issue of scrap tires, that we had just monstrous piles everywhere in the state, and when we went to DEP and said, how significant is this problem, they honestly said, we have no idea. And so the first thing that we did, and I think we have now cleaned up 98% of the piles since that first law was passed, was we had to figure out exactly where they were and then just start whacking away at them one at a time. All right, I promised some time for open discussion. Please, who would like to begin?
Senator, I'd like to
Yes.
jump in, if that's okay.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure this workshop was your idea, so that's appropriate.
I'm so happy we got to do it. So I want to jump in with, you had talked about predicting the future. What does the future look like? I wanted to kind of take stock of where we've been and where we may be going, have some projection numbers here. But the first item I want to show you, this comes, by the way, from the Natural Resources Defense Council. They did some modeling on where Pennsylvania's been, where it's going under some different proposals. So this one right here shows the various forms of energy in Pennsylvania's mix from 1990 projected out to 2038. And the story that this tells is fascinating. I mean, you see coal is in black here. You see, if you go back to 1990, it was more than 60% of our state's production for electricity, and it begins to drop precipitously around 2006, 2007. Simultaneous to that, in red, is the rise of natural gas, which by 2019, where we're at now, accounts for more than 40% of our electricity production in Pennsylvania. We see at the bottom that renewables have crept up slowly but surely during this time, and I'll let the folks down here see this as well. Renewables have crept up slowly but surely, and they're projected to grow and increase that market share, but still hover less than 10% as we move forward. I think it's important to note that because we also can tie these changes with a dramatic reduction in carbon in Pennsylvania. So carbon emissions from their peak of 120 million plus short tons annually have dropped precipitously from 2008, 2009 to the present by almost 25 million short tons annually, and this is largely due to the rise of the natural gas industry. Now, what the NRDC did is they actually projected these numbers that they call business as usual, BAU, which are the dotted red line. That projects what would happen to our carbon output looking forward all the way out to 2040 based on their computer modeling if other forces aren't brought to bear economically, and it does kind of plateau. So I wanted to, with that in mind, take a look at some of the options that are facing us then. So This particular slide looks at AEPS and RGGI and compares that to business as usual or AEPS on its own. What we can see is if we implement RGGI in Pennsylvania under their modeling, the carbon output numbers are going to continue to go down below 60%, approaching of where they're at now, down to less than 60 million short tons of annual carbon output. I say that to say, and I actually have another slide we can look at in a minute, but I say that to say that the growth of natural gas and renewables in Pennsylvania has put us on much better footing. It's a good story. It needs to be told. It doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. It doesn't mean that we don't need to do more. We absolutely do. We need to reduce more carbon, more solar, more wind, more biomass, coal reuse. All of that's got to be a part. I think coal reuse is huge. We don't talk about it enough. We need to talk about it more because it solves two environmental problems, and probably more than that, but being the water quality issue and the carbon issue. So, look, I think when we talk about RGGI, and I want to restate what I said earlier, and then I'll let some other folks jump in. When we talk about RGGI, let's bear in mind that we are at the peak of our negotiating power right now as a state, which means that if we want to help the coal industry, if we want to help the nuclear industry, if we want to help renewables, all that can be a part of the RGGI conversation. On the other hand, if the governor takes the lead and the legislature kind of backs up and doesn't jump in except to litigate, which is a real distinct possibility, particularly from the House, if that's what happens, we don't have the ability to, at least up front, maybe down the road in time, to address some of these challenges. But we would prefer that the challenges be addressed now. They need to be addressed. We could do a lot more of good things. But again, thank you for letting us come today and participate in this discussion. I'll let other folks jump in too.
Oh, and I think we're all getting up to speed on RGGI. It's an acronym that most of us have never heard of until just a few months ago. And the idea that the governor on his own could make the most significant energy policy decision on his own without any public input, without any review from the House and the Senate is horrifying to a lot of us. And so, yeah, I think we're all going to be learning much more about that. And I especially appreciated I think the insight today that it's not a one-size-fits-all model. Please.
Senator, on that point of, if I could dive into with some risk, I suppose, as to what I think the actual politics are on this gas issue. The facts are the facts, and that is coal is being retired, and it's being retired by gas. And we've modeled, again, with the PJM modeling, RGGI alone, without any other long-term contracts for solar or anything else. And what it does is it accelerates the retirement of coal with more gas. And so that chart that he showed, that we're basically, I think, at a policy crossroads as to we go all gas, or do we do a gas renewables combination? And a couple things on that. One, that modeling we did where I said that solar shaves the peak in the summer because that's when solar comes on strongest, but it doesn't work at night when gas does. So we have built a lot of gas in Pennsylvania in the last 10 years and a lot of transmission, and PJM confirmed we have a very robust grid and a very robust gas generation fleet. So when we modeled adding 5 and 10% solar, which is still a small part of the overall mix, we not only improved energy prices, but it's very compatible with gas because gas ramped that up. When you hear discussions of, well, do we need storage to level out renewables and all? Maybe, way down the road, like you said, 50 years. I don't think 50 years out anymore. 5 and 10 is, I think, where we ought to be looking. You don't need a lot of fancy technology. You can put the solar in on the farms now, and gas will ramp up and down. And the last thing I'd say on gas politics and jobs is we've created a lot of gas jobs in the state. Anecdotally, we, in the solar business, we and other competitors are talking to farmers and leasing land now on the premise that we're going to build some solar in Pennsylvania. And what we're finding is that landmen and women, as they're called, realtors and land people that were working for the gas industry, are basically ramping down. And we're getting gas land people applying for jobs with us. So not only is it the next frontier on jobs, it's very compatible. And I must admit, I'm a little wary of, with the gas politics that we have, can we get a balanced generation portfolio in this state in the next, to let us build over the next 5 years? But in my talking to the gas industry, they're very compatible. I guess that's what I would leave you with.
Yeah, and I'm heading up to my alma mater on Friday night at Lycoming College in Williamsport, and I'm staying in a hotel that wasn't there when I was a student, as were most of the hotels built in the last few years, last decade certainly, because of the demand of the gas industry. Williamsport was transformed, and talked to Senator Yaw about the positive impact. But again, it's going to change, and it's not forever.
And I would
Pottsville,
say-
Pennsylvania used to have 30,000 people. It now has 15,000 people, and so change will come. We just need to be prepared. Other questions, comments, please.
So building on the way the conversation is going, what the growth of natural gas generation is different from what the coal-fired fleet, in that it doesn't have the same requirements for space and water requirements, not as significant water requirements, because transportation is by pipeline. It doesn't need to be near a river for barge transportation. It doesn't need to be near railroads or because of pipeline transportation. So in an essence, they're smaller. So the transformation to the future grid is more distributed, because natural gas plants can be sited more easily in remote locations, and they're not the size necessarily of the coal-fired units that are being retired. So there's more, and they're spotted around, and that's beneficial to the grid, because then there are more support points. Renewable energy that we're talking about, solar farms down to rooftop solar, are similarly distributed. So we're getting this future grid is taking on this look of being all more broken up and more distributed. So the requirements of new transmission and the requirements of maintenance of existing facilities are changing. So, this is something that I would hope the legislature gets a grasp on. These changes that are taking place naturally, because of the development of technology and its accessibility, its pricing, and the ability to build out this much more distributed network, changes the requirements of the overall transmission and distribution facility. So that's this different world that we're moving into. And, we need to support rules that facilitate that build-out. Does that make sense?
I get it.
Yeah. It's different. It's different. We came through, I mentioned I worked for the New York Power Authority, and in my time there, one of the things I got to do was go around and recognize the 51 municipal electric systems that exist in that state on their 100th year anniversary. And this was in 2006, 2007. So all of these towns and villages had their own electric systems. And when you ask them what they did with electricity back then, the only thing to do was put out streetlights so they could expand the Commerce Day. So the point to that is that, the pendulum is swinging back in the direction of this distributed generation world, where the 20th century brought us economies of scale, where bigger was better. If we build a bigger one, it'll be less expensive. Well, we've reached that economy, and now it's gone back the other way. And this is the time that we need as a community, as a state, to recognize this swinging back of the pendulum to a more distributed generation network.
I think it's important to note, too, that we've talked about, there has been some serious good news on the environmental front in this state for many decades. In one of my classes, I asked newspaper editors why we haven't read more of that on the front page, and they said it's human nature that according to all of their surveys, they're more attracted to bad news than good news, which really doesn't say a lot of good things about us, but I believe them, and I suspect their surveys are accurate. I understand, too, that when interest groups are out there promoting their cause, they're much more likely to attract a donor dollar or a click or two on the internet if they're talking about a bad news story than wow, look at the good thing that happened over there. But I have just recently, I was in Philadelphia with the Schuylkill River Greenway and told them the story that poor Josh has heard way too many times about, as a fifth grader at the Pine Street Elementary School, when we kicked the ball in the Schuylkill River, we were told, you will not go and retrieve it, because we would have come back filled with black muck, and we would not have smelled very good for the rest of the school day. I have kayaked that stream. I'm not all that good a kayaker, which means that I've also had to swim there, and I see people fishing there. And the government didn't do that by itself. There were private sector partners every step of the way. And I think in each of the cases that you've indicated, it's going to require some kind of a continued public-private partnership well into the future, probably well beyond our grandchildren's grandchildren. Please.
Yeah, I'd love to expand on that point of, bad news sells and bad news gets people excited. I talk to a lot of people every day, all the time, about solar energy, and it's, a lot of it is good news. It's the potential this has for you as a homeowner, for your community, and it really gets people excited. It motivates people. It turns them out to come to watch me give a PowerPoint presentation, on a weekday evening when they probably have better things to do. And for a lot of the groups I'm working with, local community groups, local activist groups, local economic development groups, solar is this opportunity for a bright future. It's one of the rare warm and fuzzy energy stories we can tell, and they see it as empowering, not just because maybe they are concerned about air or water pollution or things like that. They see it as empowering because it can be a community-controlled energy asset, and whereas our traditional energy system is by necessity of the technology dominated by very large companies who are the only ones who can own a hydroelectric dam, a coal-fired power plant. Those can only be sited in very particular places. Solar flips that whole paradigm on its head, and in doing so flips the power dynamics of the energy market, where now a regular middle-class family can own a power plant. They can control where it goes. They can control where their energy gets from. They can accrue the bulk of the economic development the economic benefit that comes from that power generation. It's going to the homeowner. Community solar further kind of puts this idea on steroids of community control of energy assets by giving communities the chance to say, all right, Bill has a lot of land he's not using, and we all would like more affordable access to energy. Let's band together and put together a community solar project. Or a religious congregation can do this on a particularly large church roof. It gives power back to local communities, helps build local wealth building. It's about more than just electric power. It's about political and economic power.
Jared.
There's one thing interesting to hear. I mean, we're hearing about how costs are going down for a lot of generating. We heard that solar renewables prices are coming down. It's becoming more cost effective. Certainly, gas prices are the cheapest they've been in pretty much in modern history, and that's driving down certainly energy prices for coal refuse, one of the things for us is, unfortunately, our cost is going the opposite direction, and in a sense, we're a victim of our own success. When these facilities were sited, most of them were sited next to large coal refuse piles. Well, those piles are gone. Now, actually, unfortunately, we have to go out farther and farther, and with that is a greater economic cost to do so. Again, as I mentioned, our cost, the majority of the cost of these facilities is on the reclamation side. In a sense, you almost have to think of what we're doing not as being energy companies, we're reclamation companies. We're reclamation companies who use power as a subsidy to pay for the reclamation. But in the end, that is the majority of the cost, and unfortunately, I said that cost keeps growing as we get further and further away from the sites where these plants are located. So one of our biggest costs is the trucking. It's getting out to those facilities, getting out to those sites from the facilities, I should say. And to go out and do that, unfortunately, I said that's where we struggle in that, as much as we've tried to reduce costs over the years in ways we can, the one thing we can't reduce is where the piles are at. And unfortunately, they're further and further away from where the sites are at. If you look around, where the projects are located, where the site, right around the plants, they're for the most part cleaned up. Now we're reaching farther and farther away to sites that previously were seen as uneconomical, and it's only through, again, partnering with the state to do so. A great example that we heard about from Senator Udicek at the meeting we did about the tax credit was the Schwarzville site up in Luzerne County, a site that never would have been done, and addressed by anyone, certainly not even the coal refuse industry, without the partnership with the state. So unfortunately, I said it puts us in a slightly different situation. But I think if you look at what we're doing, it's unique because there's something different. If you look at and again, we get lumped into the fossil fuel category in many ways in the regulatory schemes. We're often regulated as coal plants. But yes, carbon is the fuel source, is a major source, is the major fuel source that powers this. But that said, it's the remediation that is the major source of what the cost is, and it's the major benefit of what we're doing. So, again, there's some distinctions here that unfortunately often get overlooked, both in the regulatory sector and in the energy sector.
And I think what I'm hearing here is that if we do RGGI right, it could really help a lot of folks. And if we do it wrong, it could be exceedingly bad news for the people of Swayersville, because they'd be living with that monstrous pile for a long time to come that isn't just ugly, isn't just polluting every time it rains, but God help you if and when it catches fire, as so many others have. Okay. Anything else? We've enjoyed my Senator Martin's office as well, and so I thank you. All right. Yes, please.
That
Brett.
point quickly on leadership. Oh, so did you want to go? On leadership, you've heard, and there are a number of bills introduced by environmental groups, coalition of developers, RGGI advocates, and I think what I really appreciate about this is, as the majority committee, is, maybe it's obvious, what we really could use is some leadership on how those all come together. So there's net metering battles and community solar battles. The greatest scale of rural benefits is for not just community solar, but farmland solar that feeds the utility grid as well. They're both connected to the grid. One, as you heard, serves that community. The other serves everybody in the state through the utility. And I described the kind of policy we need to get those costs of capital down, long-term contract. So you got that piece. Then you have a net metering piece, RGGI dollars. There's so many tools that each of these bills, frankly, can't put together in the best conservative, cost-effective way. And frankly, advocate groups that we're a part of can't either. So that's why I'm excited to be here today. Some leadership could go a long way on, you mentioned the governor probably shouldn't determine alone RGGI dollars. Boy, you put all those together with the leadership in the Senate and the House, you could really move things forward in Pennsylvania. I guess all I would say is we will serve that as best we can, but we probably can't do it and you may be king.
Well, and that dialogue needs to continue as ideas get suggested. We need to hear what the good ones are and what the bad ones are, so we don't perhaps make the mistake that some other states have done. And when I sat in the House as the whip next to then leader, later Speaker Sam Smith from Punxsutawney, Sam wasn't an expert communicator. He would never claim that title, but he had, I think, the best description for public policy that I have ever heard on this job or at my night job at Penn State. He said that the textbooks would say everything is incremental. The way Sam Smith explained it was that we never do it all one loaf at a time. We do it one slice at a time, and anybody who wants the whole loaf goes home hungry, okay? And so I think that will be how we will continue to address this, just slowly, painfully, but again, hopefully we get it right.
Senator, if I
Yes,
may.
please.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to mention just a couple of things. In your packets here today, some testimony from folks who weren't able to make it today, but it's worth taking a look at. One, the Farm Bureau has testimony in here, very substantive. They talk about a number of issues that we've talked about today. Important to note that they have endorsed the community solar bill, SB 705, in those remarks. So if anybody says, hey, I heard the Farm Bureau endorse the bill, but I haven't heard that, well, it's in the remarks. Number one. Number two, Dr. John Lehman, who serves on our Leadership Council, not able to be here today, sends his regrets. He did have some interesting points in his remarks worth mentioning. I think I'll highlight from everything in there that had the Iranian attack on the Saudi oil fields of September the 14th happened a decade ago, we probably would have gone to war. The fact that we didn't is a testimony to the energy diversity and the increased energy development that we've done, heeding the call of the 9/11 Commission, on which Dr. Lehman served, to develop our domestic energy for national security purposes. We've done it. We have a lot more to do. We can always get more diverse, but the good news is that the actual advice of that committee and others from the ashes of 9/11 was heeded, and we're in a much better place now geopolitically as we consider divesting from the Middle East's struggles and strife as he has recommended. One final thing I wanted to mention, the Pennsylvania Conservative Energy Forum is holding a symposium on December 9 and 10 here in Harrisburg. We've got cards today for anybody who would like to take one. We are looking for partners. Anybody in the room interested in partnering with us, we'd love to have you. Tom Ridge, former governor, and John Lehman are our keynote speakers. For members of the legislature and for staff, we're going to waive your admissions fee so you can come. All we need you to do is sign up on our website. But they're going to speak a lot more about the geopolitics that I just referenced as well. Lieutenant Governor Jim Cawley will be with us, and we'll talk about the domestic markets in Pennsylvania. So 2 days, December 9 and 10, with those speeches taking place on the 10th. Love to have anybody who would like to be a part of that to join us at the Hilton, walking distance from here at the Capitol.
Thank you very much. I think we stand adjourned. This is very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.